Masked agitators smashing windows and inciting riots, organized groups putting wood on fires to burn stores, armed individuals taking control of Capitol buildings, protesters smashing windows and fanning fires, racial tensions, police firing rubber bullets and canisters of tear gas, the National Guard mobilized to protect citizens, vitriolic exchanges between the federal government, the state government, and local law enforcement, scenes of police brutality in the absence of police presence, police stations burning, a pandemic gripping a nation and the desperation of unemployment at historical highs. These aren't the signs from a futuristic movie of a dystopian society. These are scenes from just this past week in America, and as violent confrontations increase and expand like wildfires from their point of origin, it's not a question of when martial law will be established, it's a question of how it will be established in your community. Can you protect yourself from civil unrest and armed government overreach? Can a democratic society remain free much longer under such tremendous violent pressure? Are government lockdowns inevitable, imprisoning you in your home? How much longer will your home be even safe? In this video, we'll examine the multiple circumstances that will lead to a formal declaration of martial law and what you can do now to prepare yourself. Even before the more formal declaration, however, it is important to understand that martial law can come in many forms and can be established without even a formal declaration. Armed police, National Guard, the military, even bands of controlling militias or armed citizens can bring about the same effect as martial law and can threaten your freedom and even your life. As a prepper, my primary concern is to look at the horizon and help you determine how and what you need to do to be prepared for. While some may want to see some political slant in this video, know that there is not. As an observer of the current conflicts, I merely strive to extrapolate out the possible immediate effects which can threaten your safety and hope to provide you with a few measures to help you and your family stay safe. Number 1. In response to protests and violence. With that said, the first most obvious way that a formal declaration can come about is in response to protests and violence. Historically, conflicts have usually been symmetrical in nature. That is to say, it was relatively clear that one side held a belief that they were fighting for, and the other side sought to maintain the peace and some semblance of the status quo. But what we're facing right now in America is asymmetrical divisions that don't hold clear, definable stances. There's a form of chaos as divergent parties sow division and spark conflicts that can easily spin out of control into larger, more wide-scale forms of insurrection. Autonomous activist groups are militia groups seizing Capitol buildings and threatening lawmakers. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and deeply divided political factions all tout the banners of their cause, but function to divide and stoke chaos. Though they may proclaim their motives are pure, many within these organizations are truly only interested in the destruction of the established order. A well-documented and long-time goal of the white nationalists, for instance, has been to spark a race war. The Boogaloo or Blue Igloo, Blue Luau movement, formed through the internet in 2019, has at its agenda the armed resistance of what they perceived as a tyrannical government. They are truly agitating to bring about a civil war. Antifa, for instance, has a very anti-capitalism stance. Many of these groups are armed, radicalized, and coordinating efforts to sow chaos and destroy the stability in society. The bad news is that they're doing a pretty good job right now of creating conflict, and though they may have vastly different motives and allegiances, they're fighting alongside each other. The state and federal governments are forced to respond to violence. There are two measured approaches in that response. The first is a call for unity and cessation of the violence, but with deep divisions being local, state, and federal authorities, and some of these authorities stoking the conflicts through their conflicts, action or non-action, calls for unity fail to have any substantial effect. The second approach is to lock down and enforce order through armed forces. Whether those are local police, National Guard, or federal troops, it depends on the circumstances and who ultimately can control the conflicts. But they're all martial law, even without a formal declaration. In the absence of any government methods of establishing control, you can expect armed individual groups to maintain control over pockets of cities. As those groups conflict with each other like a type of gang warfare, the fires of chaos continue to spread. So the government's response to protests and violence is the most rapid and most likely possibility for the establishment of martial law. Number 2, to quote-unquote protect public safety. Even with conflicts many miles away from our homes and faraway cities, martial law can be established in your area to protect public safety. As these conflicts spread into other cities across the country, Governments will act to ensure that their populations are safe. In an abundance of caution, police presence can be significantly stepped up. Curfews might be established to ensure peace at night. Everyday citizens might be stopped, questioned, investigated, or detained as possible agitators. Neighbors could turn on neighbors quite easily in such vitriolic times. Under the guise of protecting public safety, martial law can easily creep into place over any population. And what happens when armed militia groups decide to take public safety into their own hands? Small roaming bands of armed citizens can easily take the law into their own hands. The result of just 2 armed citizens taking the law into their own hands resulted in the death of Ahmaud Arbery, an African-American man jogging in Georgia. A few armed quote-unquote do-gooders, unversed in the law and constitutional rights but fully believing they were protecting the larger community, can spark wide-scale violence. An even larger, more organized and well-armed group threatens the authority of the local police. Police actions to check compliance of an armed group could lead to even further conflicts and violence in the street. Knowing that violence could stem from an armed citizenry, governments, under the guise of maintaining public safety, could establish curfews or laws that further agitate the population. One thing can lead to another in a cascading effect, and martial law can easily be established in even the most seemingly peaceful community. Already amidst a pandemic and with violent protests in the streets, consider how the perceived need to protect public safety might be used as an excuse for martial law or any natural disaster to compound the problem. A hurricane, torrential rain flooding an area, or breaking dams, an earthquake, or fires raging out of control. Any one of these can add fuel to the existing conflict to provide opportunities for agitators or increase law enforcement. Protecting public safety is a broad term for the suspension of rights, so be aware of how conflicts can compound the need to protect the public. Number 3. In response to federal and state conflicts. The third way martial law can easily be established is in response to federal and state conflicts. Historically, the United States has had pretty clear definitions of power between local, state, and federal governments. The federal government has respected the state's right to deal with its own problems until these problems were beyond their control. Today, these levels of government are deeply divided. The federal government routinely calls into question the state governor's authority. State governors routinely criticize federal overreach. Deep in an election year, as the president sows the seeds of contesting election results, and as states amidst a pandemic seek to ensure mail-in voting rights for its population, a potential powder keg is being established. Regardless of any election outcome, the potential spark from a protest turned violent could easily lead to martial law. It's not unimaginable to even visualize these festering and brewing divisions leading to a full-blown civil war. It's odd to say that, since that seemed like such a distant possibility just a few years ago. However, the lack of a federally orchestrated call for unity, increasingly more volatile pockets of civil unrest make a larger civil war possible. Even without something as extreme as a civil war, as states seek to assert their rights to keep their population secure under a constant barrage of federal criticism, it's not unreasonable to assume that some states will seek to go it alone and further exacerbate faction groups of their citizens. The federal declaration of a national emergency, however, gives the federal government authorities to establish martial law. They can assuredly deepen the divisions between state and federal governments. When the president tweets, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts," shooting occurs in a martial law situation. So it isn't unreasonable or even hard to imagine that martial law and federal overreach is knocking at the door. While I'm not striving to hoist any particular political view into this YouTube channel, any reasonable person could agree that the divisions between local, state, and federal governments have not been greater in our own lifetimes. As these divisions become greater, without any clear call for unified efforts, the tug-of-war of power can easily trample over citizen rights and security. Martial law looms over the seemingly safest of areas. Number 4. To weed out agitators. The fourth way martial law can easily be established is by any enforcement agency's efforts to quote-unquote weed out agitators. We see glimmers of this in the incident in Waco, Texas, the shootout at Ruby Ridge, the Oklahoma City bombing, and the Bundy standoff. As governments make preemptive moves against radical groups in an attempt to seize weapons or stop potential nefarious plans, they open the door to a potential backdraft of armed citizen response. Whether the perceived threatening group is radicalized or jingoistic matters not at all. In an attempt, for instance, to make sure protesters are not armed, could they stop and search everyday citizens merely caught in the same proximity of the protest? How would an armed member of one of the earlier mentioned groups respond to this detainment? How would his or her peers react? How would a normally law-abiding citizen react to a violation of their Fourth Amendment rights? In any of these scenarios, the exertion of government authority can lead to a larger conflict and to the government's need to establish martial law. Law enforcement's goal is to get ahead of political conflicts. Imagine if a homemade bomb similar to the one used in the Boston Marathon bombing were to detonate in a crowd of protesters or in a group of police officers. The resulting reaction could immediately lead to weeks of multiple arrests, illegal searches, and even armed conflicts. As law enforcement casts its dragnet and rounds up the usual suspect, a form of martial law is suddenly the reality without even a formal declaration. Number 5. What you can do to protect yourself. This all paints a very grim picture, I realize. I wish it was a more promising and rosier world we were looking at, but there isn't really a glimmer of perceivable de-escalation or calls for unity visible in the immediate future. That's not to say we won't get through this. We've seen conflicts and civil unrest before, and our country is founded on strong roots. As a prepper, there are things you can do now to encourage your safety should things continue to spiral out of control. Move away from danger. Prepare for extended lockdown. Stock your food and water. Don't go out at night and avoid crowds. Review your home security. Know your bug out routes and scenarios. Avoid expressing your politics. Be the gray man. Move away from dangerous or potentially dangerous situations. Trying to get a better view of an amorphous and potentially exponentially increasing conflict can easily lead to you being swept up into the conflict. If you see someone smashing windows, don't stop to video it on your cell phone. Instead, immediately move in the opposite direction and don't stop moving until you're far away from any chaos, even if this means making a circuitous route to your home base. It's easy to think that you won't be caught up in what you are seeing because you're one of the quote-unquote good guys, but in the fog of conflict, you're an unknown entity. You're better served to get out of the area. Prepare for an extended lockdown. As conflicts escalate and continue, you may need to spend an extended period in the safety of your home or apartment. Review and inventory your prepper supplies. Make sure to order online or shop for any items you may be missing. Prepare now before you find yourself in a desperate situation. Stock your food, water, and any medicines you may need for at least 3 weeks and longer if you're able to. It's possible that while violence or martial law spirals out of control outside, you can still be safe by bugging in. Don't go out at night and avoid any large gathering crowds. Agitators are emboldened in the darkness, and law enforcement knows this. Going out at night because it is quieter could result in you inadvertently stumbling across your agitators' nefarious plans or law enforcement scrutiny as they seek to be hypervigilant. Review your home security. Make sure your locks are working and your personal safety equipment is ready. Should conflict come to your doorsteps, make sure you have some level of security to keep safe. And if you're unable to maintain the safety of your area, make sure you know all your bug out routes and scenarios. If fires are raging in a neighboring apartment building and fire and police can't get there safely, you may have to flee with the supplies you can carry to a safer environment. Form a safety pack with nearby friends and family. If your location is compromised, you could bug out to their location and vice versa. These small partnerships can help you by making sure you're not completely alone in a growing crisis. Avoid expressing your political views, loyalties, or group affiliations. While it might be tempting to show up at a peaceful protest to show your solidarity, with evidence that agitators are active at these gatherings, it simply isn't advisable. Loudly proclaiming your affiliations during a growing conflict could make you a target from any number of directions. If you've ever seen a small fight turn into a large brawl, you know why it's important to think like the gray man. Can you disappear into the crowd and escape to safety? Can you blend into the background and be overlooked? I've done another video on my channel called The 3 Rules to Become a Gray Man, and I'll leave a link in the comments section below if you want to check that out. These are, without a doubt, difficult times. Historically, we have as a country faced divisions and conflict like this before. The Tulsa Race Massacre of the 1920s, the Chicago riots in 1968, even the Minneapolis truck strike of 1934. Conflicts will always exist in some form. They can become violent and they can lead to declarations of martial law. Regardless of the formal declaration, forms of martial law through an increased armed enforcement and proactive policing can lead to greater conflict. I sincerely hope that we will see a positive resolution to the current conflicts we face, but it's imperative that you take measures now to prepare for extended and deepening conflicts in the future. Hopefully, cooler heads and level, steady leadership will douse the rising flames, but we have to prepare for the possibility that it may not. For a deeper analysis of even more scenarios that could bring about martial law, I'll provide a link in the description section to a video I did last year called The 5 Signs Martial Law is Coming. If you found this video useful, please feel free to share on social media, click the like button, and provide your feedback in the comments section below. As always, stay safe out there.